I'm going to talk about your favourite topic, which is retrofitting homes. And I'm from an organisation called South East London Community Energy. And essentially we were set up as a community group around about 8 years ago now by residents in Lewisham and Greenwich. And we try and make South East London greener and cleaner and make sure that no one is left behind on that energy transition journey that we're going on. We've seen the catastrophic issues on an international scale. What does this mean for the UK? Well, 22% of our emissions currently come from homes. That means to meet our climate emergency statement that we've made in Lewisham and to meet our net zero by 2030 targets, we need to fully deep retrofit 22 properties every single day, not from now, from last year until 2030. So there's a lot of homes to get through, a bit problematic. But I'm just going to talk about what we can actually do. I don't want to build on the problems, I'm going to give some solutions. I'm going to talk about what to look out for and the approach that we would suggest. So these are some of the key points here. Has anyone heard of what a whole house approach is when we talk about retrofitting? Great, cool. Okay, we've got quite a few in here. What we mean by a whole house approach is when you think about making your building more energy efficient, there's lots of different ways you can do it. Some people like to focus on one room, which is very handy if you're looking at doing building works in that room. Maybe you're putting in a new kitchen. It's a good time to think about retrofitting at that point. But a whole house approach is saying, actually, let's take a look at the building as a whole and let's make a plan going forwards for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, to think about not only what works for the whole building, but what works for our lifestyles as well. What milestones are there going to be throughout our lifestyles that we need to think about, because this work can be disruptive. You don't really want to plan a whole house retrofit for when you're about to have a baby in a year's time or anything like that. So these are some things to think about. There's 4 key areas that I would break down as like a starting point for people to consider when they talk about retrofit, and they are how your building loses heat, loses energy, and importantly with this, how you ventilate your building as well. How does air flow through the building? I'll tell you why that's a key part of it in a little bit. What heating systems you use? Are you using a gas boiler? Are you using electric panel heaters? Are you using oil and LPG? I think for most of us in this area we're looking at gas boilers, hopefully. What kind of appliances are you using? This is one that people often forget to think about. You've got appliances that are on all the time at home. Your fridge, washing machine is on very frequently, your cooker is on very frequently. How efficient are these appliances that we're using every single day? And of course, renewable energy. A lot of us are familiar with this because it's been the more sort of flashy side of retrofit, solar panels, heat pumps, etc. What solutions have you got to generate your own power? And I would suggest that you think about them in this order as well, because what you want to do is you want to think about reducing the amount of energy you use first, and then you want to think about generating your own power. So we would say the best energy that's saved, or the best carbon saved, is the carbon that's not used in the first place, which is why we would suggest focus on energy efficiency to start off with. This one might be an interesting one for some people. We all think of loft insulation as the first step, and that's usually because it's quite easy, but we actually lose most of our heat through potentially uninsulated walls and through drafts and windows. So if you've got that drafty door, if you've got those cracks between the floorboards, that's something equally valid to think about. And then about 25% through the roof and 15% through the floor. So SELCE as a community organisation realised that actually there's a lot of people that are really keen to do something about this problem, keen to do something with their own homes, but there's just not enough guidance out there. So we set up a project called Future Fit Homes. I run this project at SELCE, so if you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch. But it's essentially an advice service that we run, and it's completely tailored one-to-one advice, and it's impartial. We don't work with builders, we don't work with installers, and they don't impact the advice that we're going to give you. You will be able to speak to trained retrofit coordinators, and all of the surpluses that we make from this service go back into our fuel poverty alleviation work. So we've got a number of services within this. They're relatively low cost. We've sort of developed them to be almost at cost, but just generating that little bit of profit to go back into fuel poverty. So £59 an hour for one-to-one advice. That can be anything from having a retrofit coordinator come and actually look at your property and talk it through with you, to having them evaluate quotes that you've got from contractors, or having them go through detailed plans that contractors have given you as well. We also do thermal imaging surveys. I'll talk about those a bit later. Energy performance certificates, which you guys seem to be familiar with already, the thing that gives you a rating from A to G on how efficient your home is, and a few other bits, lots of free webinars and free stuff on our blog as well. So the question is, where do you start? We've already heard that sometimes there can be a lot of money that goes into it, sometimes there can be a lot of disruption that goes into it, but often the thing that people struggle with is actually how do I tackle this as an issue? So I would say the first thing is just try and do something. Don't be overwhelmed and sit and do nothing about it. If it's just reading an article, if it's just going online and watching a YouTube video about how to close up the gaps around your windows, that's a good place to start. Get your energy performance certificate out and have a look at it. I've got some notes on energy performance certificates. I wouldn't say you should rely on them 100%, but we'll talk about that in a bit. After that, if you're going to go ahead and do a big retrofit project, or you're going to do a number of large-scale measures, we would recommend that you get a whole house plan completed. This is something that's done by a qualified retrofit assessor, and that is the plan that is basically between 1 year to 5 to 10 years, suggesting what measures you take at each point, of course taking into account your building and your lifestyle changes as well. And then prioritise, because there's going to be a lot of stuff you can do, but actually pick which ones you want to do first, which ones you want to do accounting for stuff that's going to impact what you do later. For example, if you are going to replace your kitchen in 3 years' time, you might want to leave the underfloor insulation until you take that whole kitchen out and you can get to the floor more easily than actually going for underfloor insulation as a starting point. Financing is a tough one, but there are some options out there, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. Finding contractors, again, is a tough one, and personal recommendations, I would say, are the most valuable thing when you're looking for contractors. And do the small things, as I mentioned earlier. Maybe I should have put this first on the list, but yeah, do the small things first, middle and last. So to start off with, just finding out information. There's lots of free resources available. I'm going to look specifically at the kinds of properties that we find in this area, and we know that we've got some conservation area properties, we've got a lot of historic homes in this area, and there's some great advice from Historic England, so I'd recommend that you check out their website if your property does fall into that category. They've got stuff about planning, they've got stuff about materials used for traditional buildings, and yeah, just endless advice on this. Part of finding out the basics and finding out exactly what you need to do is actually looking at your home specifically and getting some tailored advice and seeing where your problem areas are in your home, because they're different in each home. This is our thermal imaging survey, and what you're looking at here is actually seeing where the cold spots within a property are. On the left is the report. That cold spot is actually caused by something called thermal bridging, and it means that this room has been insulated, but the insulation hasn't been installed in a way where it's drawn right to the edges and right to the corners of the room. So you're getting heat loss through those corners of the room, and this is a very common issue that comes up. But it's stuff like this, you would only really see it in a thermal imaging survey. These are some of the webinars that we've got on our website, so lots of different topics. As I mentioned, do check them out. So energy performance certificates, is there anyone that has never seen one, does not know what they look like, does not know what they are? Yeah, okay, so basically this is an assessment that is very quick, and it takes about an hour to an hour and a half per property, and at the end of it you come out with a form that tells you on a scale of A to G how efficient your property is. And it will take things like your walls, it will take your floors, it will take your windows, and it will give you a yes or no tick that you've got this amount of insulation in your walls, or you've got this amount of insulation in your loft, and you've got this kind of heating system. And then it will rack up all those points and give you that A to G rating. There are lots of benefits to this because it is a quick way to figure out where you sit within the sort of range of properties in the UK. It also gives you recommendations for the top 3 things you can do to make your property more efficient and what score you could get to. So if you're an E, it will probably recommend, I don't know, you do external wall insulation and solar panels and get a more efficient boiler or something, and it'll bring you to a C, something like that. And it also is useful for if you're selling your property, or if you're looking to rent a property, you want to have a look at the EPC score to see how much it's going to cost you to run this property in terms of the bills. The problems with using this is because it's such a quick assessment, is it's not really detailed and often it's not very accurate. You ought to look out for what has been put down as assumed, because that basically means that the assessor has gone in and has guessed, yes. I don't know a polite way of saying that. Basically, yeah. The costs, of course, are very outdated because government doesn't update the software as quickly as costs change. The energy savings that are suggested are also very outdated for the same reason, and the recommendations are just not that detailed. So if you're going to install a measure, get some more recommendations as to whether you should put that in, rather than just rely on your EPC. So these are some of the very common large measures. I don't have time to talk about everything that you can do to a property today, but these are some of the measures that you might think about for a lot of the properties that are in this area. Anything on there that people have never ever heard of? Any acronyms I've used that no one is... Okay.
EWI and IWI.
Yeah.
I guess, but I mean, what's EWI and IWI?
External wall insulation,
Interior
EWI.
wall, okay.
Internal wall insulation, IWI.
Great question. Solar PV in a conservation area, is that allowed or is that...
It can be done, but it depends on the situation. Solar PV has permitted development in most areas. In conservation areas, I believe that permitted development is still allowed where the property, where you can't see the solar panels. So if it's at the back of the property, you should be okay and you don't need planning.
If it's the front?
If it's the front, you'll probably need planning permission. And on that front, planners are probably unlikely to give it to you. But there are other solutions like solar roof tiles, which look like normal roof tiles, and there are probably other places that you can put the solar panels as well. So if you've got any flat roofs, if you've got any garden space.
I live in a conservation area, and they've just the Lewisham solar installation has gone to my neighbour's front facing street facing roof. So I just wonder whether maybe the planning is relaxing in that respect.
I think so, yeah.
It has happened.
Anyone got a butterfly roof in this area, in this room? Yeah. Okay, cool. There's a few of them. So they're quite common in this area, as I understand. We've talked about how to insulate these. Some people have a lot of anxieties around insulating them. The conclusion that we've come to from the properties that we've seen is if you can crawl in, you can insulate it. Might not be the easiest, might not be the most straightforward job, but if you can crawl in, you can do it pretty much. There's also different technologies now for insulation, such as air blowing in the insulation, which can work for awkwardly shaped roofs. And there are technologies that use robots to go and install the insulation in small and tight areas that you can't reach. Having said that, you need to be able to have a very clear space for the robot to roam around in. So that's often not the case with a lot of lofts, but it can work for some spaces. One thing I would say is, anyone seen these adverts for spray foam insulation? I know I get a lot of them on Facebook. Any got leafleting gone through any doors in this area? I hope not. Yeah, so spray foam insulation, it can be very hit and miss. Essentially the problems that we've seen here is insulation sprayed straight onto very old wooden beams and the insulation not being as porous as it should be, therefore trapping moisture into the beams and actually rotting the beams of the roof. So this is something that you really want to look out for. It can cause a lot of issues. It can even cause issues with your mortgage provider if you've got a mortgage and the kind of insurances for the property. External wall insulation, a lot of people think that you can't do this in conservation areas, and a lot of people are worried about this. This property is in a conservation area and it didn't need planning permission for external wall insulation, because you can see it looks exactly the same before and after, because the property was already rendered on the outside. The only thing you can see really is that they've changed the windows at the back of the house. All they needed to do for this was put in a pre-planning application that cost them £85, and they confirmed that they wouldn't need planning. Where you have got planning constraints, just think about actually, again, not doing all of the walls, but maybe doing the back of the property, and if it's end of terrace, doing the side of the property. You know, areas that don't face the street, usually easier to get planning for those if you need it. With heritage buildings, the materials that you use for insulation, any kind of insulation, are really important because of ventilation issues. If you've got solid walls, they're built to breathe. They're built to take moisture in and spit moisture out and balance and regulate, based on the temperatures inside the house and the conditions outside the house. So any insulation that you install needs to ensure that that natural process can still happen. So look into the materials that you use for this. There are lots of natural solutions as well, and those Historic England books talk about these natural solutions. Thermal bridging, interesting one. So thermal bridging essentially is a very technical term to say, think about if you've got anything that will jut through your wall and take the heat out through your wall. So if you've got, for example, a big concrete window ledge and you're putting on external wall insulation, think about how that insulation fits around the window ledge, because the window ledge will probably be drawing heat from the inside to the outside of your property. Not such an issue if it's a small window or if there's only a few of them here and there, but if you've got, for example, a balcony with big steel beams coming out and holding the balcony, then those steel beams are also going to be drawing the heat out of your property. So just think about those kinds of issues, thermal bridging. But with external wall insulation, we would say, where there's will, there's a way. It can be done, and I'll talk about a very ingenious solution that someone came up with for their conservation area home in just a second. I'm not going to talk in detail about internal wall insulation. The issues that come up with this are people will say that it takes up a lot of space in your house, and it makes your rooms a lot smaller. That depends on what material you're using. Different materials have different levels of insulating the property within different depths of insulation. So I think did you mention using aerogel earlier? One of the thinnest technologies that you can use for insulating, and very efficient. Whereas if you're using other cheaper sort of solutions, then they'll need to take up more of your room, up to kind of, I think it's up to 10 centimetres off each wall if you're using sort of the cheapest technologies, but a lot less with the aerogel, I believe.
What is aerogel then?
It's a silicone mesh cotton wool type stuff, which is sort of advertised to people as having been used to cover the space shuttles, to insulate them. So 1.5 centimetre, and then you put it on the wall, and then you can put a plaster layer over it.
This was property in Lewisham, and I believe they, can't remember which conservation area they were in actually, but this is essentially their part of their planning application. What they suggested they wanted to do, and they were really keen to get external wall insulation, was put it on the back and the sides of the property, and they knew that the council would say, oh well, you can see the extra bit on the side of the property and it's not going to be in keeping with, you know, the look of the street, etc, etc. So they proposed to actually extend the corner detail of their bricks over the edge of the insulation that they were adding. I don't know if this has been approved or not, but we will wait and see. So yeah, this is just talking about moisture movement. In solid walls, in any type of solid wall, the walls need to breathe, and that's how they were built. So I've talked about this a little bit earlier, but yeah, essentially this is a graph from a lime bonded mass wall, and it's originally, you know, a stone wall with that lime bonding. There are insulation materials that are made from lime that you can use to insulate as well, so there's lots of options, but just bear it in mind how you're using the building. It may be the case that when you install insulation you actually have to add a new ventilation system to account for the insulation that you're putting in, but it's also basic things like, do you hang your washing on your radiators? Do you boil pots without the lid on, which can be creating excess moisture inside the property, and therefore damp and mould and all the issues that come with that. If you can put your clothes on a drying rack and turn a fan on around the clothes, ideally near an open window as well. Okay, heat pumps. Anyone interested in a heat pump right now? Okay, one thing I would say about heat pumps is there's loads of there's a lot of marketing around heat pumps, which is nice because it's renewable energy and stuff like that, but it's not the right solution, especially for older properties that are uninsulated. The reason being is the way that a boiler works is it takes a large amount of power and boosts the temperature of the property, you know, working in a similar way to how our old fires used to work, in that you turn them on, there's instant heat and they heat up that space. A heat pump works very differently. It needs to be constantly on, and it's constantly on because it's giving out a low level of heat, and it needs to maintain the level of heat within the property to work efficiently, essentially. Our old properties are not good at maintaining the level of heat. You know, you've got your cold rooms, your warm rooms, your cold spots in your warm rooms as well. So insulate your home first, reduce the amount of energy that you're using first, and then think about a heat pump after that. You don't always need to change all your radiators with a heat pump. Often that is recommended because you'll need bigger radiators because there is that smaller load of heat coming out of them. But you don't always need to do that, and they don't make loads of noise. I've been to see, you know, a heat pump at someone's property in Bromley, and when they're programmed in the right way, when they're on the right settings, they don't make loads of noise. You can hardly hear them. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit more about the quick solutions now rather than the large-scale solutions. All of the solutions that I just talked about do need an investment of kind of £5,000 upwards. Most of them, if you're looking at the heat pump, it's going to be like around 10 to 15,000 for an air source heat pump, or more for ground source and water source. But these ones are going to be low cost, quick. They won't save you a huge amount of energy, but it's something you can do easily and you can do very soon. Broken it down into your water bill, your gas bill, or your heating bill, and your electricity. Water saving shower heads. Very cheap to buy. You can also get them free from Thames Water if you actually send them an email and ask for them. Tap aerators work in a very similar way. Screw them onto all your taps and they increase the pressure by injecting air into the water that's given out, so you use a lot less water and the pressure is a lot more comfortable. Toilet cistern bags. Has anyone seen these before? A bit of a weird solution here, but you just put these bags into your toilet cistern. They expand so that you're using a small amount of water in the cistern itself, and therefore every time you flush the toilet you're using less water. There's lots more solutions. I would say check out Thames Water's websites and tips on energy, on water saving here. In terms of heat loss, so you've got a lot of a lot of different solutions here. One that I forgot to put on this list, and I remembered as I was sat just there feeling the draft from this chimney, was a chimney balloon. So if you've got any open chimneys, look for a chimney balloon to put in them. Radiator reflectors, they're the ones on the far right. If you've got any radiators that are on external walls, you're probably losing a lot of the heat that's coming out of the radiator through the wall. So these are a little bit like tinfoil panels that you put behind the radiator, and they just reflect the heat back in so you don't lose all that heat through the wall. We've got a discount code in partnership with Radfleck, probably the most efficient radiator reflector, and that is FutureFit10 for 10% off, and they also donate 10% of their income to our fuel poverty work. Draft excluders, we talked about the amount of heat that you can lose from edges of drafty doors and windows. They come in a roll like that. You can also get draft excluders for your letterbox if you've got an old letterbox, and door brushes if you've got a really big gap under your doors. Very cheap, very easy to put in, and do make a difference. Windows, who doesn't have double glazing or can't put double glazing in? This is window glazing film. It's not going to bring you anywhere near the efficiency of putting double glazing in, but it's just something that will help. So it's a plastic film that you put over the window, and then you kind of use a hairdryer to heat vacuum it in, and it creates that vacuumed gap of air that insulates it a bit better. So last thing I'll mention on heat is making sure that you're not heating rooms you don't need to heat. This is a really obvious one, but if you don't have enough controls on your radiators, like those little things that you turn, which are called TRVs, or thermostatic radiator valves, and a programmer for when you want your heating to come on and off, then please sort that out so you don't heat all your rooms and not use them. There are obviously a lot more developed ones you can get now, like smart heating controls where you can turn it off from your phone and turn it on when you're in the car outside or whatever, but at least get those radiator valves put on. And in terms of electricity, LED light bulbs thankfully were mentioned as a first solution. Most of us have got them already. Look at your large appliances we mentioned, plug sockets and standby devices. Always switch them off. They do use a small amount of power even though they're on standby. When plug sockets are turned on, it is the same as well. So it is small, but every little helps. Okay, who measures the amount of water they need before they boil the kettle for a cup of tea? Yes, my kind of people. Okay. How do you pay for all of this? Has anyone anyone who's done works here, can I ask where you paid for this from? Most people pay for this stuff from their savings. That's the first thing we've come across. There are now green mortgages available with most banks. A lot of the time you can either just borrow more on your existing mortgage at a preferential rate if you're doing green stuff with it, or you can buy a house and do it up with a green mortgage and send it if you're an investor and you want to do that. Loans as well, there are lots of loans that are available, similar to when you're applying to the bank for an extension or to buy a new car, etc., etc. And we've talked a little bit about the group purchase schemes that are out there at the minute. This was essentially solar PV group buy scheme. A contractor called Solar Together gets allocated to do all of the properties in Lewisham. So the idea is that those properties that sign up to get this assessment done and sign up to have the solar get it done at a lower rate than you would do if you went privately. Just the idea that if there's lots of people buying in, it will be cheaper. We saw this scheme run. The costs that we saw weren't particularly low in comparison to what we were seeing on the wider market. I think with solar, the costs are already relatively low, and there were some issues with the administration of the scheme as well. So if you're going to go with a group purchase scheme, just try and make sure that it's something that has been running for a number of years in your area so you can see how well it's been doing. There is the Eco Plus funding coming out, hopefully April this year. The government has consulted on it, don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but as mentioned, it's going to be for properties in council tax bands A to D, they've proposed, and they're going to fund a certain amount of measures. I don't think we know how much they're proposing to fund, and we're not sure if it's match funding or if it's 100% grant funding yet. But that might be something that replaces the Green Homes grant, which kind of happened but didn't happen last year. We're also working on a project at SELCE with an organisation that is called London Rebuilding Society. They specialise in something called equity release. Anyone heard of equity release? Yeah, okay. So equity release generally has a bit of a bad rep, I would say, but they are a social enterprise that looks at ethical equity release. So they're working with people who generally own their own homes, have paid off most of their mortgage and have a lot of equity in their property, and they work to put together a plan for the property to increase the value of it, and that includes green measures like insulation, ventilation, renewable energy, in addition to all the other general measures that improve the value of your property. They will essentially fund the works and then take equity in the property, but they'll only fund the works where the increase in the value of the property is larger than the equity that they will take. So the homeowner won't be out of pocket. That's a project that we're starting this month, and hopefully in the next few weeks I'll be able to tell you guys a lot more about this and how to get involved. So another innovation project, and this is sort of one of the last slides that I'll talk about today, is something that we have been doing, thinking about that whole concept of group purchase, thinking about actually people want to go through retrofit knowing what their neighbours are doing and doing it together rather than trying to do it alone. So we applied for a small amount of funding to do this project to work with a street in Lewisham, and that street is Gordon Brook Road. And what we've been doing with them is essentially giving them one-to-one advice and retrofit advice as a group, running some kind of retrofit parties. So if you guys remember like Tupperware parties, we've changed it to retrofit parties. And we've now done 16 whole house plans for houses on that street. Obviously the costs are massively reduced because a lot of the properties are very similar build, and 5 of them have gone on to get assessments for external wall insulation. So we're learning a lot from this process. We're learning a lot from this group of neighbours going through the process all at the same time. And we're finding that the main issue is them actually being able to finance the capital works and figuring out where that finance is coming from. But this is a comparison project between Lewisham, Manchester and Brighton. So hopefully by the end of this year we'll be able to compare how the 3 cities have done and learn from each one.
Are they all privately owned?
All privately owned as far as I'm aware. So with the local authority properties, we generally don't get involved because they have really separate funding streams that they can apply for. Oh, also, if you want to come and make your own solar panel, please join us on the 28th of January. The details are on our website. Last thing I'm going to talk about is just about the wider work that we do at SELCE. The bulk of our work is actually not on retrofit for homeowners and landlords and tenants. The bulk of our work is working with communities. We have worked on a lot of solar PV and LED lighting retrofit projects at schools, leisure centres, community centres, and we actually fund these through community shares, which means people like you and I put some money in and we get a return on our investment over the next 10 to 20 years, and that's what pays for all of this carbon saving stuff to go on in those schools and community buildings. And we're doing energy and environmental audits for small businesses and kind of community organisations as well. And the biggest team at SELCE works on fuel poverty alleviation. So we've got about 10 people that do that full time, support people to understand about their energy bills and how they can reduce them and what grants they can apply to, and help them go through that very complicated process of applying to the grant. And then there's 3 or 4 of us that do all the other bits. So if you're interested in any of these as well, do let us know. But yeah, key take homes really is like, we know the scale of the problem, let's do something about it as soon as we can. And if you don't know what to do, start with something small. You know, start with those chimney balloons or draft excluders or whatever else. Get a plan together, talk to your neighbours about what you're doing as well, because lots of people have done things in this area around retrofit, and the most valuable knowledge you can get is actually seeing someone who's gone through it, had that experience, etc., etc. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.